With regards to maintaining the finances, if someone who has never done the taxes before is all of a sudden being, relied on to be the primary person doing the taxes, that can be a source of a lot of anxiety and frustration. Things like grocery shopping, like home upkeep, that if there was a fairly balance beforehand that can shift, and you as caregivers probably know all too well that, taking on more and more things in addition to all the things that you already did, just make it a much busier and a much more frustrating day. And then the actual physical assisting, if you are a 120-pound person, you're expected to lift a 190-pound person who has fallen on the floor, physics is against you, unfortunately. And, these are the sorts of things that can come up, on a basis where, you have to have a game plan. What if that happens? Because physically you're not able to actually lift that person up. In addition to just the yard work and pet care, things like that. So how do we address these changes in regards to household roles? The main thing is you got to set your boundaries and you got to know your limits. And again, that is, don't injure your back trying to lift somebody up when you know that it's going to be bad for you, okay? That is a limit. That is a boundary that you need to know, and you need to respect that. As well as asking the questions, can I take over this role if he or she is not able to do it any longer? If I can't, what's the contingency plan? Make sure that you have friends, neighbors, community around you that can assist you, that can help you with these things, as well as contacts for professionals that can step in when the need arises. Recognizing, as we said before, that tasks can take longer for people with Parkinson's, but it's really important for them to maintain independence, that they need to continue to do all the things for themselves as long as they are able to. As well as adding in extra time. If you need to get up 5 minutes earlier because it takes 5 minutes longer for the person to get dressed, that's what you need to do so that they retain that independence. As well as factoring in medication, as we talked about, and making sure that on times correlate to if you know you're going to a holiday party, that you don't go at a time when the person is going to be right in mid-dose, at a time when maybe they know that they're wearing off, things like that, but that you go when that medication is working its best. And also just important that the people in their family, try to maintain an identity, that you don't let Parkinson's become every aspect of every portion of their lives. If a person was a great cook, then they're not able maybe to do all the things in the kitchen, what's a way that they can continue to keep that in their lives in a way that's safe and enjoyable for both people? If they love playing sports, maybe either coaching or being involved in the sport in a way that maybe they can't physically do every aspect of it anymore, but they're still involved in it, because that activity and that involvement is really going to help. So that Parkinson's can affect the ability to travel, to participate. The main ways of addressing this, and a lot of this obviously we've already kind of covered, but making sure that there's a clear line of communication. Anyone who's been in a long-term relationship knows that really is the basis of making sure that things don't fester, that you really are able to talk about both the things that come up in day-to-day life as well as the things that are hard to talk about. Because the second that you really give voice to those things, they become a lot easier to talk about. And the more that you address them, they take away a lot of the weight that might be keeping you from bringing them up in the first place. And each time, much like buttoning buttons, it becomes easier the more you do it. Identifying what the core of the activity maybe that is no longer able to be done, and adapting that to be able to be done for the person. Finding new ways to maintain a relationship that's outside of just talking about Parkinson's and dealing with Parkinson's day in and day out. All of us had lots of lives before Parkinson's showed up, and it's important to keep aspects of all that stuff in your life still. Getting involved in the Parkinson's community, which obviously things like support groups, doing moving days, these sorts of things are really good. As well as just staying intellectually active, and that's important for both you as caregivers as well as the people with Parkinson's. So caregiver challenges, so anger, frustration, exhaustion. These are all things that that come up just over and over. So we'll go back to the journal. So we're all going to play amateur neurologists here for a second. So this is the daily routine of John Doe. He wakes his wife up at 6 a.m., demands help getting dressed. He may or may not eat breakfast. He falls asleep at the dining table. She wakes him up at 7:45 and tells him to lie down. He's obstinate, he sleeps at the table, and or he will move to a living room chair, downstairs bedroom, and he sleeps till 11. He wakes intermittently between 11 and 1. She comes home from her job, they eat lunch, he watches TV or works on his stamp collections. He falls asleep again at 3. He wakes again at about 6. He has dinner, he falls back asleep again, goes from 7:45 to 11:30. He then goes to bed when his wife goes to bed, but then he's up and down throughout the night. And from 1 to 6, he's awake basically with frequent bathroom visits. He may go to his office or sit in front of the TV, possible short stints of sleep. And then at 6 o'clock, he marches back into the bedroom and wakes his wife up and demands help getting dressed. Problems? Okay, so what do we see? What do we see that's wrong with this picture? Everything. Yeah.
He's sleeping too much during the day.
He's sleeping way too much during the day. Okay. And why maybe is he sleeping so much? Because he's depressed. Anything else? Bored.
Needs exercise.
Needs exercise. Oh, you guys are great. All right, so where's the independence? Where's the exercise? Where's the social activity? And why is his depression not being treated? So he demands help getting dressed. He doesn't try and do it for himself and then say, I'm having a lot of trouble here, can you help me out? He walks in and says, all right, I'm ready to get dressed, help me. Doesn't even want to try anymore. Doesn't leave the house, right? Has no social interaction other than with his wife and the TV. Sleeps way too much during the day, and then wonders why he can't sleep at night.
Water before bed.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So nocturnia or going to pee a lot in the nighttime seems to be something with Parkinson's patients in particular. So it's really important to make sure. And when he does get up in the middle of the night, what is he doing?
Good question.
Should we be watching TV if we can't go to sleep?
No.
Should we be playing with our phones when we can't go to sleep? Should we be doing anything that's interactive or exciting when we can't sleep? No. Right. So the best thing to do if one can't sleep is to get out of bed, go into the next room, sit in a low-lighted room and read something, either a newspaper, a magazine, or a book. Not a Kindle, not a phone, not an iPad, nothing electronic. Read something boring, right? Wait about 20 minutes, and then try and go back to sleep, okay? TVs should not be in bedrooms. A bedroom is for 2 things, okay? I'll leave you to know what those 2 things are. Sleep hygiene is very important, and the main issue with phones and iPads and all that stuff is they emit a light that tells your brain to wake up, okay? And the second you start interacting with that, you are going in the exact wrong direction than you should be if you're trying to go back to sleep, okay? So depression obviously also can cause a lot of this, and he, I think, was horribly depressed and never was really adequately treated, partially because it was 1990 and antidepressants had really just kind of shown up on the market in the last few years. But he also just had a real hard and fast, like, I'm not depressed, it's just I have Parkinson's and you need to deal with it.
Was he self-medicating at nighttime also?
There's a question of that. What he would do, because his wife sort of tried to log all of his medications as he would take them, is he would say, oh yeah, I took something in the night, but I don't remember what it was. Which is like, oh boy, that's great. And he had Valiums, he had all of these other drugs, available that he could take. But it didn't seem like he was taking a lot of heavy duty stuff. It was mostly just that I think he slept so much during the day that his schedule was just completely off.
Isn't Valium a depressant drug?
It can be. I mean, it's addictive, first of all. It's for anybody over about the age of 60, they just shouldn't be taking it because there's way too many side effects that can come about. But long-term use of any benzodiazepine can cause depression and a whole bunch of other things. I think he came by his depression honestly. I don't think it was really due to medications, but it just was the fact that it affected so many other aspects of his life. So anxiety and depression definitely impact relationships and intimacy. People with Parkinson's are very much at an increased risk to develop anxiety and depression. The current statistics I see, about 50% probably. It's so common in people that they really talk about it as being a symptom of Parkinson's now. And the fact that it can be adequately treated, that newer SSRIs are actually both antidepressants as well as anti-anxieties. So that's really important as well because they do tend to go hand in hand. Caregivers are also at a risk for emotional health risks. And that depression and anxiety definitely can contribute to sort of the withdrawals of intimacy in a relationship, added conflict, changes in how we feel, and attractiveness, as well as fatigue and the excessive sleepiness. So here's just some stats to scare everybody. Family caregivers who provide care 36 hours or more weekly are more likely than non-caregivers to experience symptoms of depression or anxiety. Caregiving spouses experience symptoms of depression and anxiety at a rate 6 times higher than non-caregivers. Caregivers caring for a parent experience symptoms of depression and anxiety about twice as high as non-caregivers. The factors that may go into the likelihood for being debilitated by depression are, things like tending to someone who has more advanced, behavior changes, personality changes maybe that are caused by the Parkinson's, frequent conflicts or not having a good relationship with the neurologist and or the primary care specialist. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is just sort of due to, some people live in places where there is only one neurologist, and it's really tough when you have one choice and maybe you don't have a great relationship. And it's really important to have a good relationship with a neurologist because there needs to be a lot of give and take. It needs to be a trusted relationship. And then just sort of people who don't have others that they can lean on. And all those factors really do go into the likelihood for depression becoming an issue. Yeah?
Learning how to self-hypnotize yourself, is that helpful?
Learning how to self-hypnotize yourself? I would maybe call that a form of meditation, which can be helpful. I don't know about self-hypnosis, but certainly taking time to kind of center oneself, which is a lot of what meditation goes into, can be very helpful. So emotional challenges in Parkinson's. Depression, can be a result of Parkinson's. It can also just be, an adjustment factor. It definitely can be improved by medications, both adjusting the actual symptomatic medications, so the levodopa, as well as maybe starting antidepressants in addition. The thing to remember with taking any antidepressant is the fact that they can take up to 3 months to actually start working. A lot of people don't realize that, and they stop taking it after a week because they don't notice any sort of change. Anyone taking an antidepressant after 30 days, about 30% of people will experience some relief. In 60 days, so 2 months, about 70% of people. But that's still 30% of people that after taking a drug consistently every day for 2 months are not showing any benefit. And it really, unfortunately, is the case that you have to just keep taking it and trust that it will eventually show some sort of help. But the fact that it can take up to 3 months to start showing effectiveness. And that's when you start the clock on, none of us want to take medications for the rest of our lives. The hope is with antidepressants that you take them, the depression will hopefully resolve, and then at some point you can start to wean and go off of the antidepressant. But you start the clock from when you start seeing a benefit, not from when you start taking the medication, because they take so long to actually start showing a benefit. So if you take it in January and you start seeing a benefit in March, that's when you start the clock in March. And so a year from then, you can then go back and say, well, it seems like it's still helping, but I'm not quite ready to get off of it yet. But because it takes so long, some people basically, don't realize that you need to start from the benefit, not from when you actually start taking it. So depression definitely in caregiving can be a result of the increased stress, obviously, and the shift in focus. The fact, away from your own personal health, which is very, very important. You have to take care of yourself. You have to keep doctor's appointments for yourself. And the stress can be addressed both medically as well as just some proactive health maintenance strategies. So some statistics on depression and burden. So about 66% of this survey of patients were female, all were spouses or partners. About 27% reported that they felt more depressed. About 47% actually showed an increased score on the BDI, which is sort of the standard for depression index. That greater caregiver burden was correlated with greater disease severity or increased PD-related disability, which goes hand in hand. Obviously, dealing with someone who has a lot more issues is going to obviously create more health issues for yourself as well as far as your own well-being. And the burden was correlated obviously with also mental health issues maybe that may be popping up. There's a real symbiotic relationship between depression in a patient and depression in the caregiver. And that greater depression in the caregiver and burden related with that also showed a correlation with decreased satisfaction in the marital relationships. So hopefully everybody knows the signs of depression, but just in case you didn't, these are the major signs of depression. Mostly just that feeling of hopelessness, increased irritability, which is probably one of the most common ones. And obviously when you have more burden, you are already feeling more irritable, but that you start to react more commonly and an increased, there's a real loss of pleasure and interest in doing things. Fatigue, which also can be really rampant. As well as just, levels of concentration can drop. There's difficulty with sleeping can also happen, weight changes. Obviously things like death and suicide, thoughts about those. And then just physical symptoms that kind of come about. We talked about it in the last one, but there's actually a form of what they call a pseudo-dementia that can come about in people who are really, really depressed. The great part about that is that if you treat the depression, the dementia can actually go away and it reverses. But that people can actually become so depressed that they seem as though they are cognitively impaired. So that's something really to think about, because obviously we're always looking for things that can be reversed, and that this pseudo-dementia can come about, and unless it's followed up on, obviously a person might be thought of to be cognitively impaired, when in fact they're just really, really depressed. Okay, so here's a few nuggets from the journals. Hopefully you guys can relate to some of these. So John resents my health and his dependence on me. We had another discussion boiled down to his fear of losing control of the family, the finances, losing his mental acuity, losing ability to pursue stamp collecting, both in tears, no real solution. He falls asleep and I try to wake him, but I end up eating dinner alone. Next day, seems that night was all my fault. Allowing him to go to dinner was wrong, arguing with him was wrong, ignoring him was wrong, trying to help him was wrong, right? I'm teary tonight, depressed, lonesome, and feeling sorry for myself, a bit rebellious. Yesterday, he was feeling very sorry for himself. He feels like a slob with the drooling. He's invisible to other people who only see his illness. He feels so helpless and furious, and I have to be aware of this. I think that's really important to remember that this actually can really affect the person with Parkinson's and how they feel about themselves, and to be mindful of that. I hate holidays. Somehow, I always hope it will be different, but John's demands seem to be more onerous and less necessary, like he's trying to be extra weak and helpless. There are regular things that still have to be done, plus the holiday things, so everything is doubled. So this obviously is very apt, given that we're just going into the holiday season right now. Query, is he getting even with me because I'm going to the tech conference tomorrow, or is it just my guilt feelings working overtime? So the great thing about this lady was that she really did maintain her own identity throughout this entire thing. And she made sure to keep time for herself. She kept a job. She worked basically running a computer lab at a school. And it was really important for her to continue to do that stuff. But it really did also seem like he tried to throw up as many roadblocks as he could to try and keep her around, because he wanted her around. That was his safety blanket, basically. It bothers me that John will talk clearly to guests and our kids, but not take the trouble with me. Are all Wednesdays going to be like this? I know he dislikes the long day with the paid caregiver, but I don't want to quit my job. I need the companionship, the change of scenery, escape. There are 5 months left in the school year, and somehow I have to hang on. I got ready for school. Bless that escape. He is scared and ashamed by his wet pants events for the past couple of weeks. He says I couldn't appreciate how he felt, and I told him that I could and had, with menstrual accidents and wet pants, and it's not the end of the world. John is not convinced. Am I feeling guilty? Sure. Am I going to stop bowling? Not if I can help it. So she was a big bowler. That's what the long day on Wednesday was, is she had a bowling team that she went to consistently, and it was a great release for her. It's amazing, though, that she doesn't talk about these people that she goes bowling with over the course of like 15 years. She never has any of them over. She never, it's like that's her bowling life, and she keeps it completely separate from every other aspect. But it also was her escape. He gave me a lecture, told me I overact, don't listen, don't pay attention, assume too much, then an apology in the midst of all this emotional pickings and prodding. No way. And the Dodgers are losing to San Diego. I like how she really tied that all in together, in the midst of this pouring out of just all this frustration, and the fact that he's just coming down on her and he's pointing out every possible foible, and it's, and he's basically redirecting all this anger that he is feeling about his own frustrations, his own inability, his own, limitations. He's basically just placing on her, and she's, taking it as she can. And then in the midst of that, there's this sort of and I can't believe, on top of all this, the Dodgers are losing to San Diego. Not much changes, right? I came downstairs to lock up, do the pills, have a little cry, and upstairs to bed at 11:15. Right? So I think probably a lot of people can relate to that one. So what are some healthy strategies for starting to deal with all of these feelings that are welling up? Most importantly is accepting help. To know that you have family, you have friends, you have community around you that all are willing to help, as well as organizations, some of which are here, that also can step in when you just are reaching your boiling point. Focusing on what you're able to provide, again, just being realistic about what your limitations are, and knowing that you're doing the best that you can and you're making the best decisions. Like, none of us are trying to make the wrong decision. We're all trying to do our best. And accepting the fact that that's not always going to happen, but nevertheless knowing that you are actually trying to do your best. Setting realistic goals, I think, is a really important aspect. Making sure to break large tasks into sort of more smaller, manageable things. Prioritizing, making lists, establishing a daily routine, and being okay with saying no. And this probably goes into a lot of the holiday stuff as well. That it can be a really stressful time. It can also be a really nice time. You see friends, you see family that you maybe don't see a lot over the course of the year, but making sure that you're not overloading the itinerary at the same time, and being really, really, really guarded with, what's the reality of the situation? Are we actually able to go to 3 holiday parties in one day? No, probably not. Which is the one that is the most important for us to go to? Which is the one that we're going to both get the most benefit out of, and do that one, and say, I'm sorry, we're not able to make all 3 of these engagements. Getting connected, obviously, with places like the Parkinson's Foundation, Family Caregiver Alliance, and support groups. So when we have newly diagnosed people, one of the first questions they ask is, should I join a support group? And for patients, we sort of give it to them with a grain of salt and say, well, if that's something that you need, certainly you should explore that. But for right now, you should just live your life as normally as possible. The only thing that's really changed is the fact that you maybe now have a name for this series of symptoms that you've been living with for the last 18 months. And now a doctor has told you that this is probably what it is. But that's all that really has changed. You still got up and you were the same person with the same symptoms this morning, and now you just have a name for it. So the best thing to do is to go home and just continue to live your life as normally as possible. The other issue is that you go into a support group as a patient, you're going to see people that are more advanced than you. And we all have this unfortunate thing in our brains where we start to find connections. We see somebody in a wheelchair and we think, is that going to be me in 10 years? Is that going to be me in 5 years? We see somebody who has, a lot of tremors, and we think, is this what's coming for me? And that can be much more anxiety producing than a support group might be able to really have a benefit for early on. As people get further and further along in their progression, maybe a support group is important. Also because you start to learn strategies for, negotiating all of these changes and these symptoms as they go along. So that's for the patient. For the caregiver, I would say that joining a support group early is actually a really great thing, because you are talking to people that are all dealing with the same sorts of things that you're dealing with. They're all dealing with an increased frustration, anger, more burden. They also, you guys all have questions, and you don't know it, but you're sitting in a room of experts, of people that have all dealt with the same things that you may be dealing with right now in terms of caregiving. And a lot of people have found real common sense solutions to some of the issues that you're dealing with. But you might not find out about it unless you're sitting in a support group and you raise your hand and say, my husband recently is X, Y, and Z, and somebody else will say, you know what, we dealt with that last year and we found out that we did this, and this, and 80% of the time now it's not a problem. 80% is winning, basically with anything like this. So social support, again, just really getting out, making sure that you're interacting with people, setting aside time for connect, be it a bowling, be it walking with a friend, as well as just making sure that you are taking care of your own health needs, which I think is really, really important. If I can underscore anything with this talk, is that you have to take care of yourself. Making sure that you are staying healthy, making sure you're having enough water, making sure you're having enough sleep. Sleep is sort of, lack of sleep is the worst possible thing for any of us, really. And it's the kind of thing that needs to be addressed very early. And then making sure that, again, you go and see your doctor and, that you're getting all the things that you need answered in regards to your own health. So some of the other things, so a simple meditation practice can be really beneficial. That basically just sort of breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth with the stomach relaxed, the eyes closed. It's sort of like, it's an antidote, as they say, to a stress response. This circular breathing can actually be really important. Exercise, I know I'm sorry to keep hammering home the same thing, but it really is important that you have regular exercise, that it increases all of these things that we need. It really encourages the mood-enhancing neurotransmitters in our brains. For people with Parkinson's, exercise, there seems to be a lot of indication that it actually slows the progression of Parkinson's, so that's why it's very important for patients. But, for caregivers as well, just from a mood point of view, it's really important as well as health. Again, making sure that you are staying connected in the world and with your friends, and finding somebody who can actually just sort of, sometimes take a look at your situation as an outsider and maybe provide, some grounding or just aspects, that you maybe in the midst of where you are not able to see quite as clearly. And just making sure that you're advocating for yourself. So this is something I found actually from a sheet called The Emotional Side of Caregiving, which was written by a social worker. And basically goes through all these feelings of, if only we were perfect, we wouldn't feel. And then it has each one of these. And so I'm going to read these. So ambivalence and the coping mechanism would be basically just allow yourself both sets of feelings, right? That everyone has both these feelings, that neither the bad feelings nor the good ones are going to last forever. Anger, forgiving yourself, finding constructive ways to express yourself. Learning to walk away, give yourself a timeout. Identify supportive people you can talk to who will listen as you vent about the things that are happening. Anxiety, paying attention to your anxiety. What is it that makes you anxious? Being able to stop, being able to breathe, as we talked about. Meditate. Anything that will keep you and give you a break from what's happening in the moment. So trying to just get away from that anxious moment. Boredom, getting a break from caregiving, really important. And having time for yourself, that increases your patience as well as your resilience. You give yourself time to do things you enjoy, and you're going to find that all the other frustrating aspects of your life are going to be just a little bit lessened. Crankiness and irritability, it means that you need a break. We're totally less in control when we are tired. And being able to just blow off steam, talk to somebody about that frustration. Depression, which is definitely treatable, but is also very serious. Obviously professional help is available. Joining support groups, talking to a counselor, asking family and friends to step in. Exercise, again, is really important, especially for depression, if it can be done outside. Disgust, so this is a tough one, usually it's related to eating or bathroom-related issues. And the most important thing to remember is just to understand that this is obviously not something that the person is doing willfully. This is something that just is happening, and being able to find a workable solution or just find something as a way of getting help for it. The embarrassment, especially for Parkinson's, is important. That as I said, even if someone may be embarrassed about their symptoms, that doesn't mean that they just don't go out anymore. That they really need to be able to have that social interaction. And being able to support as caregivers the patient, and if the social situation does go wrong, be prepared to leave, but not be prepared to stop socializing. It's like, okay, well, that was a bad night, but that doesn't mean that we don't go out with this group anymore. It just means that we need to kind of figure out where it was that we went wrong, maybe make an adjustment, and try again next week. Fear, so important to having contingency plans, as we talked about. Having a backup caregiver or plan, for if there is a medical emergency, so sort of mapping out what would one do if somebody fell and you weren't able to get them up, or if there was just some other health-related medical emergency. And again, being able to talk to someone, support groups are really important for that too, because you can kind of bounce these possible scenarios and say, does anyone have something that they think would actually be the best course of action if X, Y, and Z happen. Frustration, so acknowledging obviously how frustrating caregiving can be. Again, support groups, learning from other caregivers, getting breaks from caregiving for you, making sure that you are still a person completely separated from Parkinson's, and that you're doing things that satisfy your own life, exercise and sleep. Grief, being able to acknowledge it's okay to grieve. That we try to avoid the sadness that comes along with grief, but actually allowing that is part of what actually helps promote us in getting past that grief. There's a lady that writes for, I think, Parkinson's News Today, who talks about being okay to grieve because there's something worth grieving for. That there is some real tangibilities that are being lost, and it's okay to feel bad about that, but it's not okay to sort of wallow and let that distract you from the idea that one needs to continue on. Guilt, again, just having permission to forgive yourself, that obviously none of us are going to be perfect 100% of the time, that we carry around a lot of shoulds, and that we need to try and change guilt into regret. I'm doing the best I can even though things go wrong from time to time, but I regret that I'm not perfect. Okay, that is a lot more in a positive light than just sitting around thinking, well, I screwed this up and I screwed this up and I didn't do this and I should have done this differently. And that doesn't get you anywhere as far as moving forward. Impatience, as we talked about, we do all have this inclination to speed things up, and they really just need to be able to take the time, accomplish things in the time that they need to, promoting the independence of the person with Parkinson's. And understand that you can control the environment up to a certain point, but certain things are just going to be out of the realm of your control, and being able to just sort of let that go. Jealousy, it's a natural inclination. We all feel that at times that things aren't fair. The problem is this: when we don't move on from it, when we constantly sit around and think about all the things that we don't have. Really, you want to flip that on its head and start thinking about and being grateful for the things that we do have. And trying to find, just sort of a way forward, acknowledging, it's terrible to say that you can say, well, things could be worse. That's not a great place to start, but it's at least a place that promotes then that you're going to move forward and start thinking about all the things that you do have in your life. Lack of appreciation, I think at times as caregivers, we all sort of feel like maybe we are not getting our due course for all the things that we do. Certainly writing in a journal about the things that you do accomplish during the day, that are sort of self-affirmations about all the things that you do accomplish, the things that you are great at, the things that you have adapted and learned to take on. At times going back and actually reading that, because it could be actually really great to go back and say, wow, I never would have thought that I would have been able to do that kind of stuff. Loneliness, again, finding ways to get out of the house, making sure that you're keeping a circle of friends or a support group, and really trying to expand your circle as well. Not everyone has great family dynamics, but that there are great dynamics as far as social situations and support groups and friends that we all can learn to share more with. Identifying, again, the loss that you can help cope with. This is going to be different for each person because Parkinson's is different for each patient, that the things that you're going to learn about or the things that are going to be lost are going to be different as well. And knowing that you can look back and actually, start to examine how it is that you're dealing with these losses and hopefully finding sort of healthy ways to move on. Resentment, again, family can be helpful, but there are certain family dynamics, that can erupt that make it difficult sometimes to really rely on family. And being able to accept and let go of these feelings of burden and resentment. And again, a lot of that can be done by just sort of broadening the circle of people that you interact with. And I think it's worth repeating that it's easy to forget about good things when we only focus on the negative. And then just tiredness, again, sleep is really just has to be a priority. Lack of sleep leads to obesity, illness, crankiness, impatience, inefficiency in accomplishing tasks, and mental fogginess, as if we needed any more of that, So obviously, making sure that if you're having trouble with sleep, that you go and talk to a doctor. If your sleep is related to the patient and their issues, then you make sure that you're talking to their doctor and that you're really just being proactive about it, because sleep promotion cannot be underscored enough. And as a caregiver, just thinking about yourself, pushing through each day will eventually wear you out and cause you to burn out. So what did Jane Doe do in her lives in these journals? So she kept working, she kept learning, she kept a sense of humor, which I think are all things that caregivers have to have, and you have to promote in their relationship. She built in me time every single week, so her bowling on Wednesdays, she did crossword puzzles, she was a big science fiction movie buff. She hired a daytime caregiver when the patient issues became more complicated, so that she could continue to work and continue to have her own time. And there's a substantial financial question here, which not everyone is able to use, and I understand that, but at the same way, she writes about how basically her entire paycheck goes to paying for this caregiver that comes in and watches him, so she'd go to work to make the money to pay the caregiver. I mean, it's a vicious circle, but at the same time, it was the thing that was also keeping her going, was having that escape, having that thing to do, having that distraction that really also kept her, from just kind of burning out. She accepted the help of friends and family, just taking turns with him, making sure that she did allow herself to get breaks. And she celebrated her accomplishments, which I think, can be the really important part of a journal, is that you can go back and actually read some of those things. So the fact that she took over all the finances, she dealt with the contractors related to a house remodel that was related to making the house safer, right? And this is all things that she had no involvement with up until this point. Handling insurance and prescription-related follow-up, which, that's a full-time job right there. Maintaining all of her social networks. That's old social networks, obviously not what we think of as social networks. As well as any durable medical goods purchases and returns. There was a hospital bed at one point. There was all sorts of things, everything related to car maintenance, related to house maintenance, related to yard maintenance, all these sorts of things. She also embraced computer technology. So 1990, obviously, and she was a computer teacher. But early on, it's so great to have her, you read sections where it's, this thing called the internet. It's she exercised. She made a point of it. She tried to get him to do it, and he occasionally would. But she herself focused on the fact that she needed to do it for her own well-being. She treated herself to the occasional fast food indulgence, which I think, it doesn't have to be fast food, but each one of us needs to treat ourselves with whatever it is that we really enjoy, because I think it's important for our own well-being to just acknowledge that, it's not that you're being bad, it's that you're treating yourself. And every day can't be, a life in the trench, basically, that you have to have a break. And she took picnics with friends, not the patient to the Hollywood Bowl for the orchestra programs that she would take. And that was, something that she mentioned, and at times she was really frustrated when when things would go wrong, right? And he would need her and she wouldn't be able to. And she writes a lot about the frustrations of that, because as caregivers, we all have to be prepared. Even if everything seems like it's going forward and we're going to get to that party, at the last possible second, something can go wrong and we end up not doing it. And that can be a source of a lot of frustration. But what she basically did was she was like, okay, well, I didn't make it that time, so next time I'm going to make sure that the plan is in place to make sure that I go next time. And not just wallowing in frustration, but saying, okay, well, now I know that this might be an issue, so I'm going to plan earlier and more often so that next time it's taken care of. So, again, just underscore one more time, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to care for anyone else. And I think that more than anything is sort of the, yes?
Why is it easier to take care of our partner than it is ourselves?
Ooh, boy. Well, I think that a lot of it comes down to the fact that most, if not all of you, it's either a spouse or someone that you're in a long-term relationship with. This is someone you've chosen to be with because you love them. It's really hard to see someone you love experiencing difficulties, and we all have a natural instinct to help, I think, to help, especially those that we care about, and to try and limit the frustrations that they experience. I think it's also easy as a distraction because a lot of us don't necessarily want to deal with our own issues. And it's a lot easier to take care of someone else and focus on that task as a way of distracting from focusing on maybe things that aren't real easy to think about in regards to our own health.